that does not lend itself to silent meditation. I still have another minute on mine, right? You're the boss. Yeah, we need to turn our phones off. Okay. Shabbat Shalom. It's so good to be back in this building instead of sitting in my bedroom talking to you by computer. So let's begin with the blessing for studying Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And another blessing for release of prisoners. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. We praise you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who makes it possible to free hostages. I'm told that those of you who are on live stream should be linked to rtfh.org/live, and that you can use, there's a link to be able to download my my material, my handout. And by the way, even if you don't have the handout, you'll be able to follow what I have to say in any case. I need to apologize to you in a way because I'm going to be doing this in a lecture form and ask you to hold your questions to the end, and I do hope to be able to accept questions and challenges and whatever you want to say. Most of us, particularly those of us in the Torah study group, I think assume that the Tanakh, that is Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, Torah, prophets, and writings, is a human text rather than a divine text. What I'm going to try to do today is explain why I believe that, and not ask who wrote the Torah or when it was written. Okay? That's for another kind of a lecture. I'd like to begin by thinking of how we get Torah, how we learn anything, okay? One view is that Torah is revealed, that God gives the Torah to Moses and then to the people, or gives to the people, but it comes from up there. The other is what I call discovery, and that is people look out to the world, look out to society, and draw conclusions from the patterns in the world, and write them down, and that's the Torah. And that's the general liberal view. Now, the Orthodox view the Torah, and view Tanakh, I should say, as the revealed word of God. Everything is written everything is given at Sinai. In fact, It's not just the Ten Commandments, as some people would think of. If you ask people, you know, what was revealed by God, they'll say the first thing they'll say is the Ten Commandments. Well, it's a lot more than that. It's every Jewish idea, Jewish tradition holds, every Jewish idea that's accepted as authoritative, even that which comes from the rabbis. And the Talmud is, because it's based on what the Tanakh says, is holy and is considered to be divine origin. In fact, we read a couple of times a year, Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Adonai Elohechem. All of you stand before the Lord your God, those who are here with us this day and those who are not here with us this day. And the rabbis interpreted that to mean that the study of Torah, the learning of Torah, the acceptance of viewpoints that are derived from Torah, all have authority, have divine authority. Now, the Reform view, which is the liberal view, sees truth as discovered. And the consequences of that are numerous. Let me just list a few. Since the authors are fallible, they can be wrong. And I like to say we have a right to be wrong. So any text that is written is fallible. It can be wrong or it can be right. It can be ethically good or ethically bad, depending on our interpretation of it. And that's the point too, interpretation. Judaism is more about interpretation than it is about finding an absolute truth. The meaning of any text depends on an interpretation of several authors of Tanakh, depends on us, and anything I say, of course, is also always open to question. What we'll find then are various stories on the same subject that might differ, that might contradict one another. We might find inner contradictions in any text. We might find things we don't like and therefore discard it. And we'll also possibly see repetitions. We might see the same one thing written in one place and the exact same thing repeated in another place as though it's new. There is a theory called the documentary hypothesis, which is based on this argument that one can see 4 specific documents. They see them as JEPD, the Yahwist, the Elohist, the priestly, and the Deuteronomic documents. I'm not going to deal with that. Okay, that's much too complicated. But another aspect of this is, another consequence is, that Jewish law, we can see, will progress. You'll find a law here, and then you'll find, well, maybe it'll change, or it will change at another place. So, just like our Constitution, most theoreticians believe the Constitution is something that progresses, that's not stuck in one time. And so we'll see that as well from the liberal point of view. Now, the consequences of the Revelation viewpoint, that is, the consequences of the Orthodox view, that the Tanakh is the absolute word of an omnipotent, omniscient, and God that can't be wrong and has divine authority. So, the text that such a God would give is absolutely true, whether we like it or not. There are no errors, there are no contradictions in laws or in stories. There are no different versions of the same story. And I'll talk about how they regard that or how they work with that. There are only good laws and no bad laws, because God is absolutely good. And we must observe it whether we like it or not, whether we understand it or not. The rabbis also saw that all problems in the texts are explainable. And if they're not, we accept it on faith. And finally, the text is, according to a statement in Deuteronomy, the beginning and the end of all truth. As the Deuteronomist said, there can be no additions or corrections to the text. God doesn't make mistakes. God doesn't change his mind, and it's his in their view. So, the first thing I like to ask before even going to the text is, do we act as though we believe this? I don't think so. We tend to break with many of the laws of the Torah, particularly laws of kashrut, and we don't feel bad about it. We don't feel guilty about it. If we believed that God wrote it, there'd be no excuse for eating pork or going to that Jewish wedding reception with the enormous mountain of shrimp piled up, which everyone rushes to. You better get there fast or you're not going to get your shrimp. And we don't feel bad about it. So our actions reveal what we really believe. That the Tanakh does not have divine authority. So what do we find in the Tanakh, and how do we respond to it? First of all, I remember I used to go to schools around York County and speak to children. And one time after one of my discussions, one of the teachers came up to me and was trying to make nice to me and said, "Rabbi, I just want you to know I take your Bible literally." And my answer to him was, "Well, I don't." Let me explain why. We see that translations differ. And that's not because people have different views necessarily so much, but because the Hebrew itself is not always entirely understandable or clear. So if you have a text that is not clear, you're not really sure what it means, how can you take it literally? And the problem, as I pointed out to this gentleman, is in the very first word, the very first letter, the very first verse of the first book of the Torah, Bereshit. We read in Genesis 1, verse 1, Bereshit. And most of us have translated that from the King James Version as in the beginning. Okay? B meaning in, and that's correct. B can mean in. But in the context of that word, others have come to the conclusion that it means when God or while God began to create heaven and earth. Not in the beginning, any more than, saying that baseball was all thought of by God and for the very in the big inning. Okay, terrible. But in any case, the point is that the interpretation, this interpretation, by the way, indicates two different views of God. Bereshit, in the beginning, seems to mean that God is static. When God began to create implies that God is moves, changes. So, what Bible are you taking literally when you say you're taking the Bible literally? Second thing we look at, and that is, we find that there are laws which we don't accept as good or moral. I have on the handout the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, right? Okay, we're pretty much familiar with that. And just looking at the bold, it says, if any party maims another person, what was done shall be done in return. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for a tooth. The injury inflicted on a human being shall be inflicted in return. Now, most of us find that reprehensible or at least unworkable. The Orthodox interpretation is that it doesn't really mean what it says. What it means is they say that we should pay financial payment to the person. We should reimburse the person for the cost and the value of the eye or the value of the tooth instead of taking an eye out or taking a tooth out. So in a sense here, what the rabbis have done, they changed the law. Of course, this is hundreds of years after the Torah was written. So this is an example of progressive law. Another one which I love to present to my confirmation class kids, the 10th graders, is the Ben Sorer. And that is the rebellious son. To sum it up, essentially, if your son is rebellious and will not listen to you, always does everything wrong, you shall go to the judges, and the judges will determine whether he really is rebellious, and therefore you go and you stone him to death. Okay? So, now I know many of the kids used to come to class stoned already, but and after the class, they were already by that time stoned. But how do the Orthodox deal with that? They say, well, they don't like it either. So they say, there never was such a case. And in fact, we really can't find such a case. Stoning, however, is something that still exists to this day in some cultures, like Saudi Arabia, for instance. And so is the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Up until recently, I know in Saudi Arabia, they used to have every Thursday morning, people would gather to watch criminals have their tongues cut out, their hands cut off, things like that. So this is not drawn out of something that doesn't exist, but it's something that the rabbis already 2,000 years ago recognized as it's not good. Let's look into the text itself. And what I think we'll find are some inner contradictions. We'll find some different versions of the same story, indicating, in my view, different authors. The first is the creation story. And there are two creation stories. The first one, if we look at number 5, Genesis 1, says, when God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, etc., God said, let there be life. And it concludes with Genesis, it's not 2:1, it's a little bit more than that. The heaven and the earth were finished, okay? And all their array. On the seventh day, God finished the work that had been undertaken. God, that is Elohim, ceased on the seventh day from doing any of the work, and God blessed the seventh day, declared it holy, having ceased on it from all the work of creation that God had done. Such is the story of heaven and earth when they were created. End of the story. Right? I mean, how many times does it have to say God ceased from work for us to realize that? That's the end of the story. It ends on verse 4a. 4b, that's the second part of the verse, begins with this. When the Lord, Yud-He Vav-He, God, made earth and heaven, when no shrub of the field was yet on the earth, and human beings weren't created yet, etc. So what do we find here? First, we find a beginning and an end, and then another beginning and an end. One is a longer version of the story of creation, another is a very short one. And it's more than just a summation of the first. We find possibly different names for God here. In the first version, it says Elohim did the creating. And it's God, 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 consistently to the very end of it. And the beginning of the second story is Yud He Vav He, Adonai created. So we have two different names for God, maybe two different gods. So that for itself is enough to say, well, there are two different stories. Which story do you take as being the absolute correct true story? Next one, the Ten Commandments. I love it when, I really don't love it, I really get very upset when I hear people say that, we have to put the Ten Commandments up into school, in the schools and in courts of justice, etc. I ask them, which 10 Commandments are you talking about? You're going to pick and choose which one is the right one? Because there are two of them. And the Jewish tradition recognized that there are two. The first one, Exodus 20, verse 8. If you can see verse 8, in the red it says, Zachor Yom HaShabbat. You shall remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Right? And it concludes, for in 6 days Yud He Vav He made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and then rested on the seventh day. Therefore, Yud He Vav He blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So you have one is Zachor. In Deuteronomy, which presents itself as a summation of the other 4 books, but is actually has different viewpoints than the other 4. We read on the explanation for the Sabbath day, observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy unto your God. And then let me just finish with that. So we have here Zachor, Shamor v'Zachor, keeping and remembering. Now, what are we keeping and what are we remembering? If I ask you what the rationale for observing Shabbat is, you take the first one most likely, because it says God rested on the Sabbath day, and this is supposed to be a day of rest. But we read in Deuteronomy, look at the part that says Deuteronomy 15. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Yud He Vav He, your God, freed you from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, Yud He Vav He, your God, has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Did you ever hear that Shabbat is really to be observed as a remembrance of the Exodus? That's for Passover, not okay. Well, problem is, the rabbis weren't stupid. They've been studying this for a long time, and they realized that there's a little problem here. They actually put both of them in, when they talk about this, they use both of them. In the Kiddush for Shabbat, we read Ki Hu Yom Techila, okay? Which translates as the Shabbat is to be a reminder of creation. And follows right after that, Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim, as a remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt. Both of them. So they saw this. Did they see it as a contradiction? Well, in the 15th century, Al-Kabetz in his Lecha Dodi gives an answer, a very mystical answer to how God could have had both of these different and differing views of what the Shabbat is about and still be by one God? And he answered, Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, hishmianu el hamiyuchad. Translating as, keeping and remembering were heard simultaneously. So God, when you were standing at Sinai, and you all of us were there together, when we were standing there, we heard both Shamor v'Zachor at the same time. God is able to speak, to say two things at once. Okay, now you have to accept that. I don't. Okay, but it's a nice thought, and we find it in our Shabbat service every week. And finally, on that, both the Catholic and the Protestant churches have different numbering for the Ten Commandments. Our numbering begins with saying, I am the Lord your God. Others say, no, it starts elsewhere. So which Ten Commandments are you going to put up there? It's a matter of interpretation, and I won't get into the politics of it, but it is about politics of power. If I can force you to put the Ten Commandments that I choose is the right one, I have power over you. And that's what that's all about. That's my political interpretation. Now, David and Goliath. I love the David and Goliath story. I remember listening to a record of the story when I was a child, and I read it over and over again. And I really, truly do love that story. We see in 8 that there are really two stories about this. One, we find that there are two different names for the giant. One is called Goliath, and let's see. Yes, a champion of the Philistine forces stepped forward. His name was Goliath of Gath. And then it goes down, he describes who he is, and it concludes by saying, the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's bar, and the iron head of his spear weighed 600 shekels. So that's what Goliath looks like. In the other text, looking on page 3, in 2 Samuel, verse 21, we read, again there was fighting with the Philistines at Gob. And Elchanan, the son of Ya'areh-Regim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath the Gittite, whose spear had a shaft like a weaver's bar. So we have a different name for this hero of the Philistines. Two different places. And we can't say, well, it's just a different name for David. Well, the problem is that he would have to have different parentage as well. The first one says David was the son of Jesse, and this one says that he was the son of Ya'areh-Regim. So it's not the same person, more likely. Again, this is more likely. Also, we read, of course, that David was the one who killed Goliath. And by the way, there's all those stories about David and Saul putting on David, putting his own mace on him. All those stories come at this point. So it's all about David. And then we read again, Elchanan. Okay, so now one way of understanding why they would do this is at the very end of the second story it says, speaking of other giants, apparently in the same family, those 4 were descended from the Rapha and Gath, and they fell by the hands of David and his men. So this tells me that they're not saying that David did just kill Goliath and destroyed the troops of the Philistines. No, it was David as the General David, who led his soldiers, his men, to kill and to destroy the other army. It's not as though, like Hitler conquered Europe with his little, six-shooter. No, it was a whole army that did that. I'm going to skip over something a little bit here, the Noah stories, which are a little bit difficult to get to, but hopefully I'll come back to that later. We'll see some repetition as well, repetitions of the same phrases in different places, spoken by different people. I'll tell you what, you can see in number 10, Isaiah 2:4 and Micah 4:3. I'm going to read Micah 4:3, and I'd like you to follow Isaiah 2:4. Can you see that? So, just listen as I recite Micah, not Isaiah. Thus God will judge among the many peoples and arbitrate for the multitude of nations, however distant. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation. They shall never again know war. Same thing. Lo yisa goy el goy cherev. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. Isaiah said it, and then Micah said it. Who's first? Okay. Maybe one was copying the other, but it doesn't indicate in all likelihood, it does not indicate a single author. And here's the closing piece on that. We think, peace and justice and all that are basic to the Torah, and they are. But, as we all know, amongst Jews, there's always a second opinion. And so we have in Joel, verse 4:9, takes those same words and turns it around to mean something very different. Proclaim this among the nations. Prepare for battle. Arouse the warriors. Let all the fighters come and draw near. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let even the weaklings say, I am strong. So one is in favor of war and the other is not in favor of war. When we want to say Judaism says, I had a teacher, his name was Lenny Kravitz. How do you like that? I love to show the kids my smicha, okay, which has Leonard Kravitz on it. He's as crazy in a way, I love him, as the Lenny Kravitz you know. But he would say, if you want to make a broad statement that Judaism says, you have to say it with a deep voice. And if you want to be a rabbi, then instead of learning Torah, go and develop a good golf swing. Okay, so I never did that. Now let's see, maybe I have time for the Noah stories. There are two Noah stories, at least here. And problem is that the stories are woven within one another into one story by what they call the redactor, that is the editor. So these books, these texts were taken at some point and they were put into a single document and they were edited in. So that's what happened with the Noah stories. That's why we tend not to notice the differences. First thing that we see on the left side, this is supposedly the J document. I put that in there only to make it possible to see the differences. The Lord saw how great was human wickedness on earth, how every plan devised by the human mind was nothing but evil all the time, And Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh regretted having made humankind on earth. With a sorrowful heart, the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the men who I created, men together with beasts, creeping things, and birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. God regrets that he made us, and then therefore is going to destroy us. On the right side of the page, just looking at the, which starts with, this is the line of Noah, which we're familiar with. Eila Toldot Noah. Looking at the bold, when God saw how corrupt the earth was, for all flesh had corrupted its ways, God said, I have decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with lawlessness because of them. No mention of God regretting it. It's a little bit different. A little bit different. And then here's the biggest one. How many people or how many animals were taken on board the ship? They came in 2 by 2, right? Well, it depends on which text you read. One text on the right-hand side, looking at the second paragraph, from birds of every kind, cattle of every kind of creeping thing on earth, 2 of each shall come to you to stay alive. And then it continues, of the pure animals, etc., 2 of each, male and female, came to Noah into the ark. Okay? On the left side, we see also mixed right in. Then the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark with all your household, for you alone have I found righteous before me in the generation. Of every pure animal you shall take 7 pairs, males and their mates, and of every animal that is not pure, 2, a male and its mate. Of the birds of the sky also 7 pairs, male and female, to keep seed alive upon all the earth. So which do we accept? Which is it 2 by 2 or the 7 of each? The next thing that we notice also is that the flood we normally think of as lasting 40 days, right? If we look on the left side, the very bottom, the flood continued 40 days on the earth. And the waters increased and raised the ark so that it rose above the earth. Then on the right-hand side, the last paragraph, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, etc., all the fountains of the great deep burst apart, and the floodgates of the sky broke open. And when, getting to the next page, and when the waters had swelled on the earth 150 days, God remembered Noah, and the water subsided. So one has it lasting 40 days, another 150. By the way, the word 40 is not really good to translate it as 40. The Hebrew word arba'im, or arba is the Hebrew for 4, and arba'im is the Hebrew for 40, but it also comes from the word harbe, meaning many. So when we're speaking of something lasting 40 days, we're saying it was a long time, not to be taken, quote, literally. They're not saying exactly 40 days. You know, I know that some evangelicals like to point out exactly 40, they count it out, it's a waste of their time. It just means a lot. And then we also know that, I think we're all familiar with the fact that there are 2 stories about the birds that were sent out to find whether the land was dry and etc. On the right-hand side, we read, and I'm not going to read this whole thing again, then he sent out the dove to see whether the waters had decreased, etc. And on the left-hand side, say at the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent out the raven, and it went to and fro until the waters had dried up from the earth. So we have the raven and the dove basically doing the same thing. 2 different interpretations. And finally, there are two different covenant stories. Our understanding is that the covenant that God made with Noah and all of us at the end was concluded with a sign of a rainbow, correct? So, the first one on the left, we read that Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking of every pure animal and of every pure bird, he offered burnt offerings on the altar. God smelled the pleasing odor, and Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh resolved, never again will I doom the earth because of humankind, since the devisings of human mind are evil from youth, nor will I ever again destroy every living being as I have done. So long as the earth endures, this is beautiful. So long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. And on the right-hand side we read, so Noah came out together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives and every animal, etc. And he says, I will maintain my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off from the waters of the flood. Then he goes further. This is the sign that I set for the covenant between me and you and every living creature with you for all ages to come. I've set my bow in the clouds, and it shall serve as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living creature among all flesh, so that the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. So here we have the rainbow serving as a sign. It doesn't appear in the other part. It appears only here. So let me just say one more thing about this, and that is that we think of these stories as being unique, okay, as being drawn just from Jews. But if you look at the Code of Hammurabi, you'll see the same laws. Only Hammurabi, who lived in the same area, Mesopotamia, same areas as the Israelites, and similar laws, only at least a couple hundred years before these texts were written. And we also see in Numa Elish, that is, in the texts of the Mesopotamians, similar story to the Noah story. By the way, I looked into it. There are almost every single culture has a flood story, and some are more beautiful than others. In other words, they're literarily wise, they're nicer than ours. How do you like that? Okay. So, how do the Orthodox explain all of this? I've done a little bit of an explanation of it, but one of the things is we may not understand what God's reason is behind the law, but because God says it, we do it. Of course, we don't. There are no mistakes. They only appear to be mistakes. So they find ways to explain it away. And they also say that, these might just exist as a way to teach a lesson. Well, frankly, that's a point of view that I take. But most Orthodox do not accept that, but some do. And as we've seen with the rebellious son, they explain away the contradictions. Okay. Never happened. And with repetitions, we've heard this before, they point out that every single word, every single letter of the Torah is written by God, and therefore every one is important and significant. And if you find a word here and there contradicting, they'll say what you have here is a different meaning. The word here means this, and the word there means that. Especially if you can find a little difference in the right in the spelling of a word. So if this has depressed you, I hope it hasn't. Some people have told me that it does. Let me try to sum up why I think that one should study the Tanakh and why I spend a lot of my life doing that. As we say, the Tanakh is a compilation of the Jewish people's understanding of what the authors believe God wants from us and what happened to the world and the Jewish people. Pointed out the documentary hypothesis, points out that there's specific numbers of authors and they can find when in history they were written. I'm not so sure I agree with it all. I know Rabbi Kaiserman does not. But the texts are a reflection of their own times, a reflection of when they were written, not necessarily ours. So it doesn't necessarily apply to us. Also see the Torah and Tanakh as evolutionary. It's the beginning of the Jewish people's search for what God wants for us, and that continues down to this, what we're doing right now. That we look at our world and we say, does this make sense? Is this something I want to follow? Let's vote on it. Okay, so you have a community that votes on it perhaps, but there's always going to be the one guy in the back of the seat says, no, that can't be. It's always going to be a difference of opinion. Now, what about revealing truth? I do believe that Torah reveals truth. Not necessarily the truth, but truth. We can agree that some laws are demonstrably good and true. You shall not murder. By the way, it's not kill, it's murder. You shall not murder. Of course, you have to then define what murder is, and then it becomes a very confusing kind of a thing. Then it becomes even much more interpretive. But at the very start, we'd say, you shall not murder. It's a pretty good idea, I agree. You shall not steal. I think we'd agree to that. Another thing that we notice, truth is illustrated through metaphor, through epic myths. So we find that the story of Goliath and David, it teaches us something. It teaches us something that I want my children and grandchildren to grow up with. And that is a sense that I can overcome these enormous problems that appear to be enormous. I can overcome them. My people overcame them throughout the generations. So I can too. I want to get that sense of I can get that sense of security from hearing that story. So they create images and commentaries, create images in our subconscious, if we're taught about them early enough, that inform our lives. It speaks also of the survival of the Jewish people. And at this time in our history, that is something we really are worried about. But if we read the story of David and Goliath and other stories as well, we may get a feeling that, this too shall pass. We've been around 2,000 years. It's shouldn't have happened. Okay, we should have been dead a long time ago. But somehow we managed to survive. We can again. The Exodus. I want my children to know the Exodus. Not because I necessarily believe that everything in it is true, that it actually happened that way, that when the children of Israel went through the Red Sea or the Reed Sea, that it opened up and then it closed over the Egyptians afterward. By the way, that's repeated a second time in the book of Joshua. When the Israelites crossed the Jordan, it also opened. So, happening twice. Okay, people try try to explain that as something with the stars and the planets are moving like this and this. But just at the very time when the Israelites got there, boom, all the stars and everything were right in accordance, and not only once but twice. So you can look at that and say, well, maybe not. But the Exodus as a story of a people struggling against slavery and seeking freedom is relevant at this moment, of course, as it always is. So these are images which form the foundation of the Jewish worldview. And they have, to a large extent, become the metaphors of Western civilization as well. So I have another 10 minutes. I know you have to leave soon. And if you have to leave, please, I'm not insulted. I understand. We all have lives to live. So if you have questions or challenges or whatever you'd like, I'd be glad to try to answer.
Sure. Okay. Judy.
Is there like gonna be a thing where God gave us the Torah and at the same time we could say it's part of being like interpret it from our point of view and have supposed to be the same God could give
In
us.
other words, God can give the Torah and be done by human beings as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's possible. You could say God gave it to these people, and you have 4 different people who are getting this. Okay, you have to be able to trust them for one thing. Okay, and I hear what you're saying, and fine. Yes.
Yeah, I was taught a long time ago by another, in another life, that a story doesn't have to be historically true to be morally true.
Precisely.
And that's what I figure.
Yeah, the story does not have to be historical as actually having happened, but it has a lesson to teach, and it teaches it in a powerful way. Yeah. Take care. Enjoy. Anyone else want to add? Please, I hope I haven't. Okay, let's see if somebody else has a question, Jody. Okay, no? All right. Oh, yes, we do. Or a statement, whatever you like.
If you look around the world, the story of the flood is all over.
Yes.
It's not just one place.
Even in Peloponnesia, the Peloponnesians had a story like that. And it's beautiful. I can get it to you if you want to see it. It's just a beautiful story of a flood that wipes everything out.
And I just thought we should mention today is Parashat Noach. I guess we all knew this, but I just wanted to double check.
Yeah. Yeah, the story of Noah has been interpreted in so many ways. One, in a psychological way, that sometimes we feel as though we're being flooded over by circumstances. But at the end of the story, we come out to the clear light of things. So it's a hope, but it's something that we don't believe is absolutely going to happen. But it's enough to give me strength to go on with my life.
And some of us may be wondering if it's time to build an ark.
Yes, right. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Goldenberg, for sharing your wisdom with us. It's always a blessing to have you here and to have you as part of our community. And you're such a wonderful resource. And just humanizing things, so that we all can understand it and relate to it and feel part of it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You have been a very welcoming congregation. Within 2 weeks of my wife and I coming here, we were made honorary members of this congregation. 2 weeks it took them to figure that out. That's all. And, many congregations don't do that. So whenever anybody speaks about wanting to come here, whatever, I say, come here, just see what happens. You'll feel welcomed, right? So thank you.
Shabbat shalom to everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Hope you have a peaceful and beautiful Shabbat.
Yes, I'm going to go to New Brunswick, Rutgers University, where my granddaughter Amina is going to be taking part in a choir.
Oh,
So
wow.
she'll be singing, and you can imagine what that choir is going to be like. So, yeah.
Yes, and thank you so much to Judy Hendelman for organizing all the handouts. Thank you.